Greetings friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of September 26, 2025. This day has brought an enormous number of very important and interesting events, so let's get straight into it. We begin right at the line of contact, starting with the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front. Back in July, perhaps even in late June, the Russian army launched its Zaporizhzhia offensive. This operation has lasted throughout the past few months, and over this time a very large swath of territory has gradually come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Now, in late September, Russian troops have reached the first major fortified areas: the Poltavsky stronghold, the Uspianovsky stronghold, the Velikomikhailovsky stronghold, as well as the towns of Pokrovsk and Hulyai-Pole. Naturally, this raised the big question: what will the Russian army do next? Would it press forward and storm these heavily fortified positions, or instead attempt to bypass them in search of a weaker flank? Today, September 26th, we finally received the answer. Russian forces have moved further west and launched direct assaults on both the Poltavsky and Uspianovsky fortified areas. From this sector, a large number of footage clips from objective control systems have emerged, and they tell one story only. The battle for these two strongholds is not just inevitable, it has already begun. On these videos we can see strikes with FAB bombs hitting Ukrainian defensive positions within the Uspianovsky stronghold. Pro-Ukrainian cartographers updated their battlefield maps last night, and these adjustments clearly indicate the start of heavy fighting. For comparison, maps as of September 24th still showed the situation as stable, the very last day before the storming of the Poltavsky and Uspianovsky fortifications. But from September 25 onward, the maps began to show serious shifts. The updates made for the 26th are of particular interest. Let's look at them in order, starting with the Poltavsky stronghold. According to the latest maps, published by pro-Ukrainian cartographers, there is a significant redraw south of the village of Olhivske, moving in the direction of Poltavka. The most important aspect here, however, is not the area that has been shaded in Russian colors, but the expanded grey zone. According to these Ukrainian sources, the eastern part of Poltavka, which lies on the Russian-controlled side of the Yanchel River, is now marked as contested. This strongly suggests that Russian forward units penetrated into Poltavka during the night of September 26th, effectively marking the start of the battle for this key stronghold. A bit further north, reports come from the Uspianovsky sector, where the situation looks similar. The Russian army is completing the clearance of a major defensive node located south of Novopavlivka and north of Poltavka. Another large strongpoint, as seen on the maps, has fallen under Russian control. Once again, attention should be paid to the grey zone. Ukrainian sources themselves now mark the village of Novopavlivka as fully contested, which indicates that it may soon be officially announced under full Russian control by the Ministry of Defense and the Vostok group of forces. Furthermore, several grey zone rays stretch directly toward Uspianovka itself, another signal that the assault has begun in earnest. The outcome of the battles for the Uspianovsky and Poltavsky fortified areas will have enormous consequences. They will largely determine whether Ukrainian units can continue to hold Hulyai-Pole, which is in fact the main strategic target of the Vostok grouping in this sector. Now let's move on to the Novopavlivka direction. This morning, pro-Ukrainian sources flooded the information space with reports claiming that Russian forces had suddenly launched an offensive on the Dnipropetrovsk sector of the front. By this they mean the area stretching from the settlement of Udakhne, just west of Pokrovsk, all the way down to Velikomikhailovka. That includes the villages of Novopavlivka, Ivanivka, and Malomikhailivka. According to Ukrainian sources, the Russian army is advancing northwest. From the information we have, it does appear that Russian troops managed to cross the Volchya River and are now fighting actively for control of Ivanivka. However, it is far too early to speak of a full-scale offensive directly toward Dnipropetrovsk city or the broader region. Most likely, the claims made by Ukrainian outlets have been somewhat exaggerated, though, as always in war, things can change rapidly. Next, we turn to the Pokrovsk agglomeration, from where a large number of reports are also coming in. Let's start with the western side of Pokrovsk. Russian forces are advancing vigorously along the railway line west of the city. Recall that in recent months, many attempts were made to enter Pokrovsk from the south and consolidate in the central districts, yet the front line there remained largely static. Now, however, Russian units have clearly stepped up their push along the western railway, beginning from Udakna. It is quite possible that this is what Ukrainian sources meant by the Dnipropetrovsk direction. At this stage, one thing is clear. Russia is systematically pressuring this sector, with the apparent aim of reaching the M30 highway from the south, while simultaneously taking full control of the western part of Pokrovsk. Such a move could collapse Ukrainian logistics throughout the entire Pokrovsk cluster. On the eastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the key developments today are unfolding on the approaches to the town of Mirnohrad. If we compare the maps of September 25th and September 26th, we see a dramatic change. Yesterday the maps showed the familiar lines, but today they display a significant redraw, reflecting the reality of ongoing clashes. This update is based on objective control footage released by the Ukrainian side itself. On these videos we can observe Ukrainian FPV drone operators striking Russian positions on the eastern outskirts of Mirnohrad. There are many episodes, but two in particular have been geolocated. The first strike was delivered near an anti-tank ditch running from the settlement of Razino Novoekonomichin southward. The second strike targeted Russian positions in the area of a mine shaft and ventilation tunnel. From this, the conclusion is clear. The territory stretching from Novoekonomichny all the way to the eastern edges of Mirnohrad is now under full Russian control. Of course, some pockets of Ukrainian resistance may remain. It is possible that small groups are still holding isolated strongpoints, supplied sporadically with ammunition and provisions via drones. In this kind of battle, what many already call the Pokrovsk clash, such scenarios are entirely plausible. Still, the most important takeaway from this footage is that stable logistics and reliable communication for Ukrainian units in eastern Mirnohrad have been severed. At this point, there is no longer a secure connection with their rear. This marks a turning point in the local fight, and it may set the stage for even larger breakthroughs in the days ahead. Next, we move on to the Siversk sector of the front, where the intensity of fighting remains very high. The Russian army continues to strike positions of Ukrainian FPV drone operators, and counter-battery duels are ongoing. However, when it comes to the town of Siversk itself, there are no visible adjustments to the front line. Here, an important clue comes from a small segment of the official map published by the Russian Ministry of Defense. I would like to draw your attention to a specific tail marked in yellow. This is the road connecting Lyman, Siversk, and further south towards Soledar. You can see it on the map. It is the 0812 T0513 highway leading in the direction of Siversk and then down to the south. According to the MOD's official briefing, this intersection, this turn, that very angle, is already under Russian control. If we transfer this to the larger map, then the picture, drawn by the Russian General Staff as of September 24th, shows that roughly 35 to 40% of Siversk is in the hands of Russian forces. So far, we do not have video evidence to confirm this claim, but it remains a very interesting point for analysis and speculation. Now let's move further to the Lyman direction. Fighting here continues around the settlements of Zarekhne and Kirovsk. The main clashes are unfolding in the southwestern part of this sector, on the grounds of a large industrial site. Several reliable pro-Russian experts with close ties to frontline units report that Ukrainian formations in this part of the settlement have been blocked. There is no way out. Reinforcement attempts continue, but every unit entering the Zarekhne-Kirovsk area does not return. Judging by this, it is only a matter of time before the entire settlement is cleared. Meanwhile, in the northwestern part of the Lyman axis, battles continue for the villages of Derelov and Novopavlivka. According to some reports, Derelov has already been completely cleared, while the battle for Novopavlivka is also reaching its final stage. Even pro-Ukrainian sources admit that the village of Shandryholov has passed fully into Russian control. Most likely tomorrow the Ministry of Defense will release a significant update on the situation in these localities, since we can already see that many villages have been marked on maps as either fully or partially under Russian control. Only the official confirmation is pending. Next, we turn to the Kupiansk sector. Here, Russian forces continue to advance in the western part of the city, particularly in the Yubilini district. This information is coming today from various pro-Russian military analysts. But what deserves the most attention is the official map published yesterday by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Looking at that map, we once again see the familiar yellow line, the road running through the settlement of Pristin, the R79 highway. Notice the distinct bend in the road turning west. Russian positions, according to the MOD, now extend southward along the railway line situated just north of this bend. That railway runs through the village of Osinov and together with nearby areas forms a clear axis of control. Thus, if we overlay the MOD's shading onto our working map, the front line today appears as follows. The entire railway corridor, as well as the western and southwestern districts of Kupiansk, including the villages of Sadov and possibly Osinove, are firmly under the control of Russian forces. According to the MOD and General Staff, Ukrainian troops still have a narrow corridor about 9 kilometers wide, extending from Osinove toward the settlement of Kolesnikivka. However, if you examine the terrain, this corridor is no longer viable for evacuation, supply, or stable communication with the Ukrainian group inside Kupiansk. In effect, it is already a cauldron. Perhaps it is for this reason that President Zelensky stated today he would immediately begin presidential elections as soon as a ceasefire is declared. It seems increasingly clear, in the West, in Ukraine, and in Russia, that the war is approaching a decisive turning point. And very likely, this turning point will not favor certain political figures. Now let's briefly move to the political agenda, because a great deal has been happening on that front in recent days. According to Donald Trump's latest narrative, following his meeting with Zelensky on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, Ukraine can supposedly return to its 1991 borders, while Russia is nothing more than a paper tiger, with an impotent army and a shattered economy. What can we say about this? First, Trump's opinions are often shaped by whoever last speaks with him, which frankly reveals his weakness as a politician. Second, the Anchorage track has been buried. The United States failed to impose on Russia an unfavorable interim settlement. In simple terms, the war goes on. So what actually happened? During the Alaska summit, a verbal understanding was reached on the general framework of a peace settlement regarding the conflict in Ukraine. Details remain scarce, but it apparently envisaged a withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from those parts of Donbass still under their control, while offering Kyiv security guarantees that took Moscow's interests into account. Among them, a neutral, non-aligned status for Ukraine. However, after reaching this preliminary understanding with Putin, Trump proved unable to convince Zelensky and his European allies to accept it. They categorically insisted on a frozen conflict along the existing front line and the deployment of European troops into Ukraine under US cover. Having failed both on the Ukrainian and European tracks, Trump returned to the Russian side and tried to pressure Moscow into concessions, with predictably negative results. Thus, the US president, caught between tentative arrangements with Putin and firm demands from the Europeans, fell back onto a familiar Biden-style course of continuing support for Ukraine. The only difference is that this time, America intends to make Europe pay the bills. Washington will no longer supply Kyiv for free. In effect, diplomacy has ended, at least for the foreseeable future. Neither the US succeeded in forcing Russia to surrender its positions, nor did Moscow succeed in pulling Washington out of the Ukrainian game. Everything remains as it was. And frankly, this was predictable. At present, the world faces 3 potential flashpoints that could escalate quickly, and these do not even include Taiwan or the Indo-Pakistani standoff. The first is the Middle East, where rising tensions around Gaza and the preparations by Israel and the US for a new strike against Iran are becoming impossible to ignore. Such a strike seems inevitable, since Tehran shows no intention of abandoning its nuclear program. The second is Venezuela, where a US military operation is reportedly being prepared. The Trump administration appears to believe that a few demonstrative missile strikes would be sufficient. In reality, however, an American act of aggression against Venezuela could rapidly consolidate many Latin American nations against Washington. The outcome could be a sharp escalation not only across the region, but also along the US-Mexico border and beyond, with a high probability of hybrid retaliation against American actions. Finally, Europe itself. The ongoing war in Ukraine is opening a direct path toward a larger European conflict. Increasing incidents in European airspace could at any moment become a trigger. Moreover, Kyiv might attempt an adventure in Transnistria or even Belarus. Should that happen, events could unfold according to an unpredictable and potentially catastrophic scenario. In short, the question is not so much if the situation will explode, but when. And that is all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and take care.